What's up, Hokie Nation, and welcome to this very special TSL video. Virginia Tech football has unfortunately started 0-2. There are a lot of question marks surrounding the future of Virginia Tech athletics and what it means for Brent Pry and the Hokies. So who better to bring on than the Virginia Hall of Famer David Teel? And we got a whole crew on set. Our senior staff writer Andy Bitter, our managing editor David Cunningham, our director of media Nick Brown is producing behind the scenes, and I am your host Carter Hill. David, thanks for hopping on. This is long overdue, patching you in the new studio, but we appreciate you hopping on this Wednesday morning.
Gentlemen, congratulations on the new dig, especially to Nick and Nick's dad. Man, I feel like I should have dressed up a little nicer for these.
Full tuxedo like Lee Corso, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, this is awesome. This is awesome. Well, unfortunately, again, it's funny, David. We talked about in Charlotte, Virginia Tech could ill afford to start 0-2. Well, they have, and they looked like they did in the second half against Vanderbilt on Saturday. I do want to read off some facts. Brent Pry, 2 games into his 4th season at Virginia Tech, has lost to Old Dominion, Marshall, Purdue, and twice to both Rutgers and Vanderbilt. He is 0-8 against non-conference Power 4 opponents, lost to multiple schools, multiple times within his own league that don't spend nearly what Virginia Tech does in football. And most jarring to me, he is 10-20 against Power 4 opponents at Virginia Tech. What is next for the Hokies as a whole?
How much time do you have? It's almost reminiscent, Carter, and I was thinking about this overnight and again this morning, and Andy may remember this as well. 2009 at Virginia, Al Groh is clearly occupying a warm, if not scalding seat, and the Cavaliers open with a home loss to William and Mary. And the rest of the season was just a slog to 3-9 that ends with an inevitable 42-13 loss to the Hokies at Scott Stadium. And the team is booed off the field, and a day later, Al Groh is the former coach at UVA. And we could be looking at something very similar right now. It's hard to envision how they turn this very quickly. And if they are to turn it, it has to be on a dime.
Yeah, Teel, I was going to ask, does there feel like there's an air of inevitability about this? I mean, I think the most diehard Hokies fans will look at this. They'll go, hey, 1995, 0-2, won the conference. 2010, 0-2, won the conference. Every 15 years, if you count that out, hey, it's 2025. That does not feel like it's really in the realm of possibility for this team. Those teams had expectations coming into the season. This one did not quite have like that. Do you feel like there's any scenario where Brent Pry can turn this around? And by extension, with Babcock also kind of in the frying pan here, any chance that they can get this thing righted here?
Well, they'd have to do something that they have not shown that they are capable of, and that is sustained success against the ACC. Now, 2 years ago they went 5-3 in the league. 5-3 against this schedule seems like a stretch. And I think we would all agree on that. And I think most Hokies fans would agree with that. And Andy, you mentioned 95 and 2010. Those teams were coached by a Hall of Famer who had some chops. Those teams had a defensive coordinator who, if they put assistant coaches in the Hall of Fame, would be in there as well. And they had Jim Druckenmiller and Tyrod Taylor under center. This program has none of that. And you just wonder if it's even possible at this point to turn a battleship so quickly.
David, Hokies were outscored 34-0 in the second half of that Vanderbilt game. And Brent Pry said yesterday that to your question in his press conference, that he did not question the team's effort, but he did question if the guys were tired. Did that surprise you at all? Just the reaction, the response, and this is kind of where Virginia Tech is. It seems like, Pry brings in a new strength and conditioning staff, and I get it's a short week, but that just seems off a little bit. And I know it seemed like your reaction from what I heard sitting in that press conference room was pretty similar.
I almost expected him, David, to say, "Oh no, I didn't question effort," and that would be it. But then to have him delve off into maybe we were fatigued because we didn't have quite the explosiveness and sharpness that we did in the first half. My first thought was, how do you tell the difference between fatigue and lack of effort? And I think they can be very similar. Maybe one can mask the other. And it's just hard for us to sit here and look at it and say 34-0. There had to have been at some point a lack of effort. I mean, you just 5 consecutive touchdowns. How does that happen? And he went through the litany. Had him at 1st and 20, had him at 2nd and 16, and still can't get off the field.
It's funny because I saw actually Mike McDaniel make the point on Twitter this morning. What was so jarring to me about that comment is you spent the whole offseason hyping up your new strength and conditioning coach. And 2 games into the season, you're saying, well, I thought we were a little bit too tired. I think throwing around the Q word or lack of effort is always very tough. But I agree in the sense of it was strange that all offseason, Jared Ferguson's the guy. He's really fixed this Virginia Tech strength and conditioning side of things. And then 2 games in, you're saying, I thought we got tired in the second half against that Vanderbilt offense.
They've been outscored 48-3 in the second half this season. Is that right, guys?
Yes.
That does not strike me as a well-conditioned team.
Yeah.
Teel, if this goes the way that I feel like a lot of us are predicting it might go, you've been around a lot of head coaching searches before. You've been around a lot of AD searches before. How awkward is this to do that? Would this happen if it were to happen in a fall? I mean, the timeline here just seems strange. Replacing both would be strange. If it goes down that road, how difficult could that be?
Very. And you would think, Andy, that the board needs to decide quite quickly, and by that I mean within a month, whether it collectively has the faith in Witt to hire another football coach. And if they do, then fine, you can let the season play out. But if you have doubts, and if you have doubts that this coaching staff can survive, then you have to make the AD change now to give yourself time to hire an AD, let that AD get onboarded in Blacksburg for at least a few weeks before then having to embark on a football search. Now, it's kind of reminiscent of when Witt took over for Jim Weaver, because literally within weeks of starting, he dismissed James Johnson as basketball coach and landed on his feet quite well, luring Buzz Williams from Marquette. So it can be done. But boy, there are much higher stakes with this football hire than there were with that basketball hire.
And, oh, by the way, interesting, just went to the Board of Visitors asking for $50 million more a year. This is a complicating factor in this whole thing. This is like, when you look at the board making a decision, they're going, do we give you this extra money? Who are we giving it to? Are we going to give it to you if you haven't been able to produce results before?
And guys, you were at the board meeting as well. Didn't you get the sense that, and look, maybe that was just a public face, but I thought Witt and his message were quite well received by the board.
Yes,
I would agree.
I don't know if that tells us anything. I don't know if Saturday's second half has turn some heads among board members. I think that dynamic that will be determinative of how this unfolds.
David, back in February of 24, at your previous stop, you wrote a story on Whit Babcock and Tim Sands bring uncommon leadership stability to Virginia Tech. And that duo, that tandem, the second longest tenured Power 4 AD president combination behind Kentucky.
Kentucky, yeah.
Are you surprised, as long as these two have been here, now we're talking about Whit and his job and everything that comes with it, are you surprised that the Hokies, is very open-ended, have not had as much success as you might think they would have, considering how long Sands and Babcock have been together and been in Blacksburg for?
Yes, and I think it's a very fair question, David. And you look at it, is Tech the most resourced program? Clearly not. But the Hokies didn't lose to Vanderbilt on Saturday because they don't have enough money. They lost to Vanderbilt on Saturday badly because they're not coached well enough, and they didn't have good enough players. And that's on Whit and the coaching staff. And you would have thought by now, this is Whit's 12th football season, that the product would be better. And there have been times that it was, but those times have been far too fleeting.
Are you concerned at all about the apathy that could set in with the Virginia Tech football fan base? Obviously, Virginia Tech is one of the best fan bases in the ACC. But what was so striking to me leaving Lane Stadium, I was there as a fan. I left when it was 27-10. I noticed a lot of the crowd left when it was 20-10 because I think they had just lost all hope in what was going on the field. But there wasn't booing, there wasn't chanting, there was just silence, which Chris wrote about, Andy wrote about on TSL, David wrote about too, I think is almost more haunting to a fan base than anger. Are you concerned about the apathy maybe setting in within the Virginia Tech football fan base?
Our apathy is absolutely worse than anger every time. Because not only are you talking about the folks leaving the stadium early, these are the folks that you're going to be asking for more money. You're going to be asking them to fund more athlete compensation. And Whit and Danny White made a point of telling me a couple months ago that they need to do better with the Hokie Club, and that needs to be a very solid foundation moving forward. Well, how do you go to those folks now and expect them to ante up even more when that's what they saw Saturday evening in Lane Stadium? That's a very difficult ask. That's really testing someone's loyalty and resolve.
Teel, this is a question that maybe is not easy to answer in a single clip here, but what has been wrong with Virginia Tech football over the last 15 years? I mean, it seems like there's a new boogeyman every little bit. Frank needed to retire early. They needed more money. Fuente wasn't a good hire. Pry wasn't a good hire. John Boleyn is behind the scenes ruining everything with bad. Like, there's a new explanation, it seems like, all the time. If you were to put your finger on why it just hasn't happened in the last 15 years here, what is the biggest thing holding this program back?
Yeah, I go back to the Fuente hire. Everybody wanted Justin Fuente. He was the flavor du jour. And because Frank had retired early, Whit Babcock had a head start on a lot of other schools with his search. And he landed Justin Fuente from Memphis, a renowned offensive coach. Moreover, he convinced Bud to remain as defensive coordinator. And for 2 years, it looked brilliant. And then, almost instantly, it wasn't. And there are many reasons for that. Part of that was Fuente's staff. Part of that was him. Part of that is on Witt because he and his head coach got sideways. And then there was the Baylor flirtation. And it really crumbled after that. And when you get sideways with your head coach, it is going to end poorly. And then they made what I think, and it's all hindsight, they allowed Brent Pry, a rookie head coach, to hire a similarly inexperienced staff. And I think that has proved, or may prove, lethal.
Bigger picture, and Clemson and Virginia Tech used to be very similar, sort of along parallel paths there. And then in about 2010 or so, things started to divide there. I think people have pointed to Clemson's alignment between the head coach, president, athletic director, board, fundraising, everything sort of pulling in the right direction. How much has alignment here prevented the Hokies from achieving what they could possibly achieve?
Andy, Virginia Tech has some restrictions that Clemson doesn't. Number one, it has far more sports to fund. That's part of it. Virginia state law is much more complicated when it comes to public institutions and their funding of intercollegiate athletics. So in that regard, the Hokies have, I think they're playing with a compromised hand if you're going to compare them to Clemson. But Clemson struck it rich with Dabo. They hired a guy who wasn't even a coordinator as their interim coach, and Terry Don Phillips, the former AD. That's who should have the statue out in front of Death Valley, because he's the one who made that call. And say what you will about the state of the program at present, and yeah, they almost lost to Troy the other day. But that man has put them in the playoffs 7 times, and he's won 2 natties. And it proved brilliant. And neither of Tech's post-Beamer hires have been that.
In December of 2020, Whit Babcock had a press conference where he sat down and doubled down on Justin Fuente. And in the spring that followed, Virginia Tech announced the Reach for Excellence campaign, where it seemed like the Hokies were trying to get aligned, kind of like what Andy said about Clemson. It seems like Virginia Tech has gotten there, but maybe the script has almost flipped, where before you had a head coach that didn't necessarily have the backing, and now you have the backing but not as good of a head coach. It seems like an interesting parallel, if you will, because Virginia Tech in this era of revenue sharing feels like Whit Babcock and the athletic department have attacked it head on and attacked it well, but they don't necessarily have the on-field results that they might have had in the previous era.
It's a very fair point. And guys, we saw it from Brent Pry's first game on. They didn't know the rules. They didn't know the clock rules at Old Dominion in his debut. And that's one of the reasons Old Dominion was essentially able to walk them off in that game. And, clock management, and you guys have just discussed them ad nauseum. We all have, double numbers on special teams. And oh, by the way, Duke had one of those penalties on Saturday against Illinois. So it's not like it's just Virginia Tech, but it's this staff has clearly been lacking from the start.
If you had to guess, and maybe it's not the most fair question, but if you had to guess whether or not Brent Pry makes it to the Virginia game, yes or no, what do you think that answer would be?
I think the odds are against him.
Okay.
That's the best way to put it. And I'm not sure he wouldn't agree with that, because he look, guys, and I know you all agree. This is all quite unpleasant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't like talking about people's jobs because families are affected. And, Brent Pry grew up he went to Lexington High School when his daddy was an assistant at VMI. And Whit Babcock grew up in Harrisonburg, where his dad was a coach and an administrator. Those guys have known about Virginia Tech as kids. And Brent Pry, was a grad assistant under Frank and Bud, and then Whit's been there more than a decade. They love Virginia Tech. They know Virginia Tech. And they work their backsides off for the university's behalf. But it just hasn't worked. And how painful must Saturday have been? You're Brent Pry. You have been a defensive coordinator at the highest levels of the sport at Penn State. And you watched a team score 5 consecutive touchdowns against your defense. I can't imagine what that must have been like for him.
Is ODU going to cause Virginia Tech any problems this weekend?
Yes.
Okay.
Colton Joseph's a dude now, and they know it. They saw it in spurts last year. I mean, you're talking about a guy. Indiana was the nation's leading rush defense last season. And I know the Hoosiers lost. They had talent drain as well, just like the Hokies. But Colton Joseph had runs of 75 and 76 yards in that opener. And he busted some more Saturday, albeit against an FCS in North Carolina Central, but a good FCS in North Carolina Central. So I absolutely think, especially if the Hokies are not buttoned up. Brent Pry said yesterday, he's told his team, accentuate the positives. Be the team you were against South Carolina in the first half of the Vanderbilt game. And if the Hokies are that, if they are able to summon that effort and execution, then they will win. If they don't, I think they could easily lose.
Teel, did you come to that conclusion from all the player and coach availability that ODU had this week? Something about these James Franklin guys, huh? They don't like to have people talk to the media.
It is SOP at Old Dominion. That's just how that program has rolled since Ricky got there. It is very different from, and you remember Bobby Wilder, where you could text him and be hoping for a text response, and the next thing you know, your phone's ringing, and Bobby's been in your ear for 30 minutes.
30 easy. I mean, that was an easy 30 talk there. That might be short on the short end.
David, you mentioned the quarterback Joseph. I think it was Quinn Hennicle who had that long touchdown run against the Hokies last year, and both quarterbacks played a little bit then. But Joseph is kind of taking the reins now, and we saw yesterday in Virginia Tech's press conference both Brent Pry and some of the player we talked to, Tomas Remak, the offensive lineman. They both mentioned how stingy Old Dominion's defense is. Everybody knows how much this game means to Old Dominion. Some people might refer to it as the Monarchs Super Bowl. But do you feel like Ricky Ronnie and this group kind of smell blood in the water a little bit? I mean, this is a Virginia Tech team, particularly on the offensive line, that couldn't do anything to block Vanderbilt down the stretch in that second half.
David, not only do I think they smell blood in the water, and I'm not sure if we're allowed to say this on your podcast, but I'm going to say it anyway. Don't you think they're a little pissed off that Tech canceled a bunch of these future games against them?
Yeah, I would assume so.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know Brent said yesterday, Ricky and I have talked, and we wish we weren't playing one another so we could chat more during the season. I'm not buying that for a minute. I think Ricky Ryan absolutely wants to play Virginia Tech. And I can assure you that he wants to play him this Saturday. And David, you mentioned the offensive line, Virginia Tech's. And not to rub salt in the wounds, but I was in Raleigh on Saturday. And I watched a UVA offensive line that has lost not one, not two, but 3 transfer offensive tackles to long-term injuries since the spring. So they're playing like 4th and 5th line guys at left tackle, or pardon me, at right tackle. And they averaged like 6 yards a carry against NC State and did not give up a sack. Now, they didn't win the game, but it wasn't because of their offensive line. They blocked people. And they scored 31 points. And they were 12 yards away from the winning touchdown until Chandler Morris did the one thing he couldn't do.
Pretty good running back too at UVA. Virginia Tech should have looked into getting somebody like that.
That North Carolina Central coach may prove prescient, because didn't he virtually guarantee that young man was going to run rampant against the Hokies?
I think he's
November?
cheering for it. If he didn't go on record with the prediction, he's certainly cheering for it.
Yeah, I mean, Jamari Taylor has 5 rushing touchdowns. He's averaging 6-7 a carry. He's a dude.
To tie this whole conversation together, and again, not a fun question to ask. Everybody knows what they want to have happen. But let's say Virginia Tech were to lose to Old Dominion this week, and obviously things take time and there's 2 layers to it, as we've talked about multiple times on this podcast. But if the Hokies were to lose to the Monarchs this week, and let's say hypothetically, how much does that expedite the process of what we just talked about over the next couple of weeks?
I would say considerably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
At that point, guys, it does feel irreparable. And I think people would act accordingly.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. You guys get anything else? This is quite the podcast right here. We got David Cunningham, Andy Bitter, and David Teel on the same set. This is awesome.
Yeah, this is really cool.
Teel, while we have you, because it was such a cool thing you did on the opening weekend, tell us about this 5 days, 5 games thing that you went on. And it didn't bring much luck to the local teams that you were covering along this trip, but how was that trip? What was that experience like?
It was awesome, guys. And, and you all understand the off season can be such a drag, and this off season was, especially with all court cases and CFP model discussions. It was exhausting, and you were just aching for some games. And as the schedule kind of unfolded and ESPN's playing chess and trying to figure out where to place games, I just kind of had this idea germinate and start with Michael Vick's first game at Norfolk State on a Thursday night. That was a natural. It's right where I live and work. And Wake Forest, Kennesaw on Friday was a stretch, but it was on my way. It was a game. And then it became easy. Then you drive from Wake to Clemson for Clemson LSU. And I stood there listening to Brian Kelly's post game. And when he said that Mansour Delane got the game ball, and then he shouted out Braylon Moore for his efforts, and he ended up being the SEC Offensive Lineman of the Week, I'm just thinking, oh, you're a Virginia Tech fan and you're hearing this? And then scooted from Clemson down to Atlanta for the Hokies in South Carolina, and then slogged it up to Chapel Hill for that disaster, where my highlight might have been tapping on the glass into the visiting radio booth and startling Justin Fuente, the TCU radio analyst, who, by the way, will be in that position not much longer since he just accepted a job with the college football playoff.
You mentioned the Belichick UNC game there. what is the level of regret from UNC boosters right now that forced this hire? I mean, what could possibly be going through their minds right now? 2 games into this, I mean, it feels like an experiment, and maybe some buyer's remorse right now.
Yes. And you talk about the empty stadium in Blacksburg Saturday night. Guys, that place was empty by the end of the TCU Carolina and Keenan Stadium. And it was just brutal. They were outcoached, outplayed, and clearly not a lot of talent on that roster. And the question is whether a coaching staff with darn little college football experience is equipped to fix that. And if this experiment implodes, there are a lot of people at the highest levels of the University of North Carolina system who have some explaining to do. And perhaps they will let the athletic director do his job the next time.
What's crazy there, too, is we are 2 games into his tenure. We are 2 games in. And it probably took 3 quarters to realize, I mean, you can, I told somebody the other day, like, Bill Belichick's one of the greatest football coaches in the history of football, but, like, eventually you got to have the fruit to make the smoothie. I don't think he has much fruit on that roster, so we'll see. But while I have everybody here, would you guys change your pick right now? Who wins the ACC 2 weeks into the season? I think everybody here picked Clemson. Would you still pick Clemson to win the ACC?
Ooh. It's a great question, and my answer is no.
Miami?
No.
Yeah.
Okay. What about you, David?
I don't know that I'd buy the Florida State. I don't know. I'd probably still stick with Clemson, but it's not looking good. Florida State intrigues me.
I am stubborn, so I will stick with Clemson because I feel like they've started slow in past years before, haven't exactly looked great coming out of the blocks against Georgia, and they've turned things around in the season. So yeah, I'll go with the team that has ruled the conference for the last 15 years over, people say Miami, and be like, okay, still hasn't happened for them. I'm still kind of skeptical that, well, Florida State, that's a big turnaround from 2-10 to winning the conference. So I'll stick with the Tigers right now.
Okay.
We're going to learn a whole lot more about the Hurricanes here in the next few weeks. South Florida and Florida on the schedule.
That South Florida team looks pretty good. David, to change gears just slightly, yesterday the ACC men's basketball schedules came out. Virginia Tech and Virginia bookend the schedules. Something that's never really happened before. How neat is that? That UVA comes to Blacksburg right before New Year's to open ACC play, and then the Hokies return the favor and go to John Paul Jones Arena, right around early March, I guess, right before the ACC tournament.
What we can only hope, David, is that this is not an isolated occurrence. Make this happen annually. I have pounded my fist talking to Paul Brazo, the ACC's senior associate commissioner for men's basketball over the years, and said, have Virginia and Virginia Tech at least opening the season is okay, that's fine. But absolutely, that last regular season Saturday, have them play one another, just like Duke and North Carolina do. And, it's not his decision. It's the TV folks.
Yeah.
And it's not rocket. Why they have resisted this over the year, literally over the decades now that Virginia Tech has been in the league since the 2004-05 season, I don't understand. But it's a long time coming, and let's hope it continues.
I think the close makes sense. The open
Is weird.
You're before New Year's. How many students are going to be on campus for that one? It feels like you lose a lot of atmosphere in a rivalry game in that one.
Yep, agree completely, and I feel badly for Virginia Tech because they're the ones hosting in December. But I imagine they'll get some folks in the stands, and especially if the Hokies start the non-conference well, then Castle will be raucous.
Yeah, I told somebody yesterday, it may have been you guys, like, it's one thing, like, if Duke or Carolina comes to Virginia Tech over break, like, that's a tough break. But I get it has to happen to somebody. Virginia has to come here over break, though? And I think, is the game at UVA over their spring break, too? Yes. Oh, my gosh.
Nick said yes. So, yeah, we'll see.
But that I wasn't aware of.
Well, but they'll draw good crowds.
They will, and JPJ's obviously.
Both arenas will draw good crowds, especially if Ryan Odom and that UVA squad are as cracked up to be as it seems like they can be, and it seems like Mike Young has a good team on his hands too.
Yes, yes. I know we'll be talking plenty of basketball. We'll see David in Charlotte in a couple weeks for ACC tip-off. He's actually heading to UVA right now for a Ryan Odom presser. So basketball season is about to get underway. So David, really appreciate your time. I know you're going to be hopping on a little bit here over the next couple weeks, and I'm sure we'll talk to you in Charlotte. So appreciate you spending some time with us. This was a whole lot of fun, so we appreciate it.
Gentlemen, thanks for having me. You guys be well. We'll see you Saturday in the box.
For the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer, David Teel, for David Cunningham, for Andy Bitter, for Nick Brown, I'm Carter Hill saying so long from Blacksburg, and we'll talk to you later this week.